Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show.
Every level of the Well of the Sun was a vast and boundless palace, and every building was so magnificent that humans seemed just like ants when they were in there. Most importantly, the materials that the palaces were made of were not affected much during the disaster of the collapse of the Tree of Eternity. Thus, they had to be very sturdy and durable. Lin Li landed in the palace, and while he was flying close to the ground, he downed a healing potion that he had already prepared. Fortunately, the arrow that had struck him had already turned into mana and dissipated. The medicinal effects of the potion kicked in quickly and healed his wounds. The Immortal King's incarnation did not follow Lin Li into the palaces, and instead continuously changed positions above the palace complex under the shroud of the domain world. On the other hand, he was keeping his eyes fixed on Lin Li, and thus the latter would not be able to escape his gaze even if he hid in a certain palace. It was as if the obstruction of those buildings didn't exist. Moreover, while the Immortal King's incarnation was chasing Lin Li, the stars of fury in his hands were also continuously emitting thunderous roars. Under the effect of the hunter's unique archery, each arrow was like a missile that was continuously chasing after Lin Li as it continued to fall. Although the palaces that gave Lin Li some cover managed to survive in the disaster, they were not so lucky this time, and turned into debris under the bombardment of the arrows. At this moment, the members of the expedition who were fighting the armies of the alternate world finally noticed that the battle in the sky had somehow disappeared. They then heard the sounds of violent explosions, which were getting farther and farther away from them. In the face of such a situation, no one would be unaware of what happened. The faces of most people in the expedition turned extremely sullen. He escaped. He actually escaped just like that. I could already tell long ago that he was just using us as cannon fodder. Prince Canber of the Rotterdam Kingdom was initially already extremely displeased with Lin Li. However, he only behaved properly because of Donald's persuasion and his fear towards Lin Li, who was a sanctuary powerhouse. Now that they were facing the oppression of the enemy and suffering continuous casualties, Canber flew into an uncontrollable rage, especially since Lin Li was no longer around. No, there must be a reason why ManhwaRecap did that. Donald got a great shock because of Canber's words, and he hurriedly looked over at the Tower of Dusk's team. At the same time, he also wanted to give Canber a reminder. After all, even if Lin Li was not there, the Tower of Dusk's team was definitely much stronger than the people of the Rotterdam Kingdom. Of course, deep down, Donald actually had the same thoughts as Canber. Although the Tower of Dusk's team was also there, even peak-level legendary powerhouses were just like ants in the eyes of sanctuary powerhouses. Hence, in Donald's opinion, it really wasn't surprising at all that Lin Li had abandoned the Tower of Dusk's team in such a situation. However, he could not voice his thoughts out loud despite feeling that way. After all, the Tower of Dusk was now quite a powerful force in the expedition. Even if the people of the Tower of Dusk would not fall out with them after hearing those words, their morale would definitely be greatly affected. At the end of the day, no one would feel good about being abandoned. Although he had gotten a hint from Donald, Canber was clearly already pent up with anger throughout the journey. Now that he finally had a chance to criticize Lin Li, how could he let it go so easily? Hence, he nonchalantly said, "HMPH, what reason could there be? He just didn't expect the enemy to ignore us and make him his absolute priority target." Shut up. ManhwaRecap is deliberately trying to lure the enemy away. Otherwise, none of us would be able to resist the aftershock of the collisions between two sanctuary powerhouses. To everyone's surprise, Archbishop Martin was the one speaking up for Lin Li and berating Canber instead of the people of the Tower of Dusk. Archbishop Martin was old and wise, so of course he couldn't see everything in an optimistic manner. However, the issue was the fact that Canber said that Lin Li had escaped would affect more than just the morale of the members of the Tower of Dusk's team. In the current situation, a powerhouse like Lin Li was everyone's pillar of support, and whether they could survive or not depended on him. Canber's statement would affect the morale of everyone in the expedition. Hence, after hearing such idiotic words from Canber, Archbishop Martin wished that he could knock all his teeth off. Of course, if an archbishop fought with a knight, it would be obvious whose teeth would be knocked out. However, deep down, Archbishop Martin wished that Lin Li could escape. He did not forget that Lin Li still had another magic item that could quickly improve the Holy Light devotee's strength significantly, and was extremely valuable to the Brilliance Shrine. Archbishop Martin certainly did not want to die, either, but he was well aware of the current situation. Not only did the enemy have a powerful army, they even had a more powerful sanctuary powerhouse. Regardless of which perspective he looked from, the expedition did not have a single advantage. Hence, he felt that the successful escape of a sanctuary powerhouse, who was of crucial importance to the development of the brilliant shrine, was considered a good outcome. However, their conversation had actually had some effect on the rest of the members of the expedition. Some might believe Canber, while some might believe Archbishop Martin, but no matter what, that still caused some flaws in the defense of the expedition. At this moment, the expedition was already withstanding more pressure than it could endure. When facing the elite army from the alternate world, the flaws that might usually seem inconspicuous were the last straw that broke the camel's back in this situation. Idiot, stupid, Archbishop Martin and Donald cursed almost unanimously. At this juncture, no one could be bothered about Prince Canber's status anymore. The two of them definitely had adequate reason to be angry because Canber's statement was the reason for the sudden increase in casualties of the expedition, and the cause of them slipping into a dangerous situation. Seeing that a few alchemy colossuses had been destroyed in the blink of an eye, Canber seemed to have also realized that he made a mistake. He secretly cursed Lin Li in his heart for escaping the battlefield, as well as Archbishop Martin and Donald, who had scolded and insulted him. However, on the surface, he did not dare to say anything much. In the entire expedition, only the Tower of Dusk's team did not have any casualties during the crisis. Although the mages of the Tower of Dusk were also affected, they were in the center of the expedition, and even if they were injured, only the members of the team of the Rotterdam Kingdom, who were in the periphery, would be affected. Besides, there were many legendary powerhouses who were competent enough to handle the unexpected situation in the Tower of Dusk's team. At this moment, a massive alchemy array appeared in the center of the ground of the expedition, followed by a figure that was far taller than the alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam Kingdom, appearing in the center of the alchemy array. Angelano, who had been hiding among the mages and protected by them, finally couldn't hold back any longer when faced with the crisis of the expedition. Clearly, the timid Angelano no longer felt safe under the protection of the mages. Hence, he summoned his Titan-level alchemy colossus. He would only feel at ease when hiding in his alchemy colossus. After entering the alchemy colossus, Angelano stopped being cowardly and instead swung the alchemy colossus spear in a circle above his head. After he smashed the dragon knights, he yelled, "Lowly bugs, shiver under the might of Lord Angelano." Under Angelano's control, the alchemy colossus bypassed the expedition's defenses and crushed more than 10 heavily armored infantrymen with its steel feet. The giant pillar-like steel spear swung through the air with infinite might, and even if it only grazed the dragon knights a little, many of them ended up with broken bones and tendons. Angelano's alchemy colossus was a true Titan-level alchemy colossus. Compared to it, the alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam Kingdom's team were just like children's toys. The Titan-level alchemy colossus was a true dragon-slaying artifact that truly allowed goblins to create a short but outstanding civilization in the history of Anral. Alchemy colossus. Is this the legendary Titan-level alchemy colossus? How is that possible? The metallurgists of the Rotterdam Kingdom's team stared wide-eyed at the majestic alchemy colossus. In the Rotterdam Kingdom, which claimed to have alchemical civilization as its foundation, people only heard of the Titan-level alchemy colossus in legends, and there were even many master metallurgists who asserted that there would be no Titan-level alchemy colossus in this world, because even if it was made so large, it would involve a lot of unattainable technology that they could not even think of. It was even more so for the Titan-level alchemy colossus that, according to legends, could exert legendary-level combat power and even contend with sanctuary powerhouses. However, the people of the Rotterdam Kingdom never thought that the dwarf in funny armor from the Tower of Dusk's team would actually summon a Titan-level alchemy colossus. If it weren't for the fact that they were fighting a strong enemy at this moment, the metallurgists of the Rotterdam Kingdom would immediately stop whatever they were doing and swarm over to study the Titan-level alchemy colossus. "We must get it, we have to get it," muttered Prince Canber, who had been scolded by Archbishop Martin and Donald. When he saw the Titan-level alchemy colossus, he forgot the unhappiness in his heart and began breathing rapidly while muttering to himself. Since Donald was right next to Canber, he naturally heard the latter mumbling. However, he did not reprimand Canber this time, because he was actually thinking the same thing. He could totally imagine the great advancement in alchemical civilization that could be achieved if they could obtain the Titan-level alchemy colossus and the various technologies contained within it. However, it was definitely not easy to get that Titan-level alchemy colossus. Regardless of whether they could overcome the hurdle in front of them, even if they were able to return safely in the end, they would undoubtedly be courting death if they tried to snatch an alchemy colossus from a sanctuary powerhouse. The combat power of the Titan-level alchemy colossus itself was not something that ordinary forces could contend with. Not only did the appearance of the Titan-level alchemy colossus affect the members of the Rotterdam Kingdom's team, the incredible combat power that could contend with the sanctuary powerhouse also played a significant role. in helping with the expedition's current situation. The expedition's members who nearly collapsed finally became equally matched with the army of the alternate world again with the help of the Titan-level alchemy colossus. However, everyone knew that the state of equilibrium was actually unstable, and if Lin Li could not deal with the sanctuary-level enemy, the expedition would still face an inevitable death. At this moment, Lin Li was also clear about the situation faced by the expedition through the soul contact. However, being chased by the Immortal King's incarnation, he was now in a difficult position to protect himself, and there was no other solution he could think of other than taking the gamble like what he had thought. However, Lin Li also managed to convey his message to the Tower of Dusk's team through the soul contact. He told the servants who were at the peak of the legendary realm to look after and protect the other members of the Tower of Dusk. As for those from the teams of the Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam Kingdom, he decided to leave them to their own devices, as that was the fate of cannon fodder. The Immortal King's incarnation was following closely behind Lin Li, and the stars of fury in his hand were continuously roaring and casting arrows from the Endless Worlds game system. However, Lin Li managed to find a way to escape precisely because he was performing those archery techniques, which Lin Li was familiar with. With the knowledge of those archery techniques of the hunter, Lin Li, who was engrossed in scurrying away, suddenly changed directions as if there were eyes on his back. He then shot into the palace at the side. The position that he was in was where more than 10 arrows landed at the speed of lightning. A violent, groundbreaking explosion followed immediately afterwards. It was the rapid explosion arrows, that was a fusion of the rapid arrow and explosive arrow archery techniques, which Lin Li had obtained after performing a series of quests in the Endless World. After obtaining it, it became the skill that Lin Li used the most often to kill monsters. After attracting a large group of monsters, he would launch a few rounds of rapid explosion arrows, and watch and enjoy as his EXP bar filled rapidly. Unfortunately, when it was his turn to be the prey, Lin Li could not feel happy at all. At most 15 rapid explosion arrows could be launched in a row, and the explosive power of each of them was equivalent to legendary level magic spells. Even though Lin Li was now a sanctuary powerhouse, he would still suffer dire consequences after being struck by one. If it were a face-to-face battle, Lin Li would naturally be competent enough to take the attacks. Even if there were waves of attacks, his true body wouldn't really be injured, let alone with a rapid explosions arrow. However, Lin Li could not stop now. Otherwise, he would lose all hope of turning the situation around. After dodging the attack, Lin Li did not seem happy at all. He did not stop, and he quickly passed through the palace with an afterimage. The majestic palace behind him also collapsed with loud roars, causing debris to fall on his back. Looking at Lin Li, who was fleeing, the Immortal King's incarnation did not reveal any emotions at all. He did not seem angry that Lin Li had dodged it at all, and was terrifyingly calm. He simply raised the stars of fury in his hand again, and an arrow that was condensed with the power of the world appeared in his hand immediately before darting out with a loud, thundering sound. Like a meteor, the arrow pierced through the air and chased after Lin Li's figure. It formed a crack in its trajectory, and it already reached Lin Li's back in just a moment. The arrows shot by the Immortal King's incarnation might all seem similar to outsiders, but Lin Li could accurately determine the archery skill used by the Immortal King's incarnation through the subtle features. Just as the arrow was about to hit his body, a piece of the debris of the stars emerged from behind Lin Li and accurately hit the arrow. With a loud explosive sound, Lin Li's figure once again shot out of the explosion and passed over a high wall with the power of the explosion that gave him a boost in speed. Damn, if I had known this day would come, why would I have trained to the point where my hunter archery skills were at their best? Lin Li complained and spat out a mouthful of blood, but he continued to scurry towards a statue near him. The golden wall behind him that he had just passed was also blasted into ashes. Although Lin Li had blocked that arrow just now with a piece of the debris of the stars, he got more injured than he already was during the explosion. It was not that Lin Li could not dodge in time, but rather that it would be useless even if he dodged, because the Immortal King's incarnation was using the guiding arrow, a hunter's archery skill. For archers, the guiding arrow could definitely be considered an archery skill that all archers dreamed of. The guiding arrow would ignore all evasive maneuvers, and once it was launched, it would follow its target. Even if Lin Li activated his space robe, the guiding arrow would chase after him, while splitting through the space. Hence, Lin Li could only resist it with powerful defense. Any dodging would be futile. Boom! The massive statue immediately exploded after it was shot by an arrow. Its head then rolled on the ground, and gold-like debris darted everywhere. However, Lin Li had long disappeared at the back. Whoosh! 10,000 arrows were shot at once, and they flew in the sky above Lin Li like a sudden storm that covered the sky. Every arrow that fell would blast a deep black hole in the hard crystal ground. The entire ground was covered in holes like it was a beehive. However, Lin Li was nowhere to be found. Although he had escaped the misfortune of being struck by 10,000 heart-piercing arrows, he sustained dozens of cuts. If he had been an ordinary person, he would have bled to death. Fortunately, as a sanctuary powerhouse, Lin Li had a strong body, and he also had superior-grade healing potions with him, thus allowing him to survive by a hair's breadth. Under the pursuit of the immortal king's incarnation, Lin Li finally stopped for the first time. Right in front of him, there was a pagoda-shaped golden altar, which had an empty groove at the top. That was one of the altars Lin Li had taken the debris of the stars from. It was the holy light altar. Whether his guess would be right or not, and whether he could win the gamble or not was all dependent on this. No longer caring about what was happening behind him, Lin Li reached out to grab the debris of the stars, holy light, and pressed it into the groove of the golden altar. Almost at the same time, the immortal king's incarnation's attack also landed on his back forcefully. The arrow landed like a star, shattering the elemental shield, and it blasted through the space robe on Lin Li's body with massive power, almost blowing his spine into pieces. Under the powerful impact, Lin Li's body involuntarily flew into the distance while spitting out a mouthful of blood that landed all over the ground like rainwater. The only thing that he could be thankful for was the fact that the debris of the stars, holy light, had been perfectly embedded into the golden altar. As the debris of the stars, holy light, returned to its position, the golden altar immediately blossomed with a radiant ray of light. The entire well of the sun trembled continuously in the light, seemingly excited about the return of the debris of the stars, holy light. A wave of holy energy spread towards the surroundings quickly with the golden altar as the center. It fused with the space and seeped into the ground, dispelling all filthy and evil existences. If there had been people on the lower floors of the well of the sun at this time, they would have seen the abyssal demons that had not been killed by the expedition shrieking in agony like it was doomsday. Although there were no visible changes in their bodies, the holy aura in the space was causing extreme torment to their souls. At this moment, Lin Li was blasted by the immortal king's incarnation, and his body rolled around in space while he spat out a large amount of fresh blood. However, he soon stabilized his body without turning around. His power of flight had also reached the maximum, and he was flying quickly in another direction. As soon as Lin Li flew away, another rain of arrows landed in the position that he was originally in, crushing that area into powder. However, there was not a single speck of debris that landed in the range of the golden altar, as all of it was blocked out by the holy light. Although he was severely wounded again, Lin Li was elated this time because he could clearly feel that the debris of the stars, holy light, had returned to its position, which resulted in a considerable impact on the well of the sun. As the owner of the debris of the stars, Lin Li could even feel that he also seemed to have some control over the power of the well of the sun. Although the control he had was still far from being enough for him to defeat the immortal king's incarnation, it at least meant that Lin Li's previous guesses were correct, and he had made a right decision to take the gamble. If all 7 pieces of the debris of the stars returned to their positions, and allowed him to gain control of the entire well of the sun, he might have the power to turn the situation around. However, Lin Li's situation was not very optimistic, as the arrow that the immortal king's incarnation had shot at him was one of the unique archery skills that belonged to the king of hunters, Star Shatter. That arrow even caused Lin Li's internal organs to rupture. If not for the space robe that diverted some of the power away, the arrow would have blasted open a hole in his body. The injury could be considered the worst trauma that Lin Li had suffered since he had arrived in Anral. He was not in the endless world, where he could restore his health by consuming a large amount of health points. Even if Lin Li had the top-grade healing potions, he wouldn't be able to fully recover from his injuries in a short while. Besides, this was only the beginning. Lin Li could already foresee that he would definitely be struck with a fatal blow from the immortal king's incarnation because of the pause in his attempt to flee when he restored the remaining several pieces of the debris of the stars to their positions. Even if he only stopped for a moment, he would still receive a fatal blow from the immortal king's incarnation. However, he had no choice, especially since it had already been proven that it would lead him to victory. How could he easily give up that chance? Suppressing his injuries, Lin Li could no longer be bothered to curse the immortal king for being such a psychopath. The only thought he had was to rush to the next golden altar. Seemingly sensing the effects of the restoration of the debris of the stars, holy light, the immortal king's incarnation was finally triggered by Lin Li's actions. Not only did he speed up in his pursuit, he even shot the stars of fury incessantly. An arrow that contained terrifying power was chasing closely behind Lin Li. The violent explosions seemed to be chasing after Lin Li as they continued to appear in the palace, destroying the luxurious and majestic buildings. However, Lin Li would always emerge from the violent explosions and sprint towards the next target with utmost determination. The heavily damaged space robe that Lin Li was wearing had lost most of its defensive effects, but Lin Li did not have time to put on another robe with better defensive power at all. It was almost as if he was using his body to resist the attacks that were raining down on him. With his experience, he tried to dodge the fatal blows one after another. Gloomy dark, which emitted endless power like a black hole, became the second piece of the debris of the stars to be returned to the golden altar. The golden well of the sun gradually began to lose its illusory appearance, revealing a real existence and aura that truly belonged to this world. However, in order to put the debris of the stars, gloomy dark, in place, Lin Li had no choice but to once again resist the Immortal King's incarnation's attack. Falling Moon, which was one of the special skills that were unique to the King of Hunters, was even more powerful than Star Shatter. If Lin Li had not sped up to buffer the arrow as it hit due to the past experience he would have really been shot and sliced in two by the arrow. However, even so, Lin Li was definitely severely wounded, especially since he had just been struck with a Shatter Star arrow in front of him. He immediately lost the ability to feel anything in his lower body, and maybe his spine had really been shattered. Fortunately, Lin Li was a mage and could use the power of flight. Those of other professions would probably only be able to sit and wait to die at this point. Of course, even ordinary mages might not be able to use their power of flight after sustaining such severe injuries. Lin Li managed to maintain such a flying speed because he had maximum mastery of the power of flight, and also because he was harsh enough on himself. Physical pain was nothing to Lin Li, as he had even experienced the agony that the heart-piercing potion would bring, which felt like it could penetrate his soul. As long as he was able to stay alive, he would not give up on fighting, even if he was blasted to the point where only half his body was left. At worst, he would change his body like Connorus did. Read latest chapters at NV.E.L.B.co.am. Fortunately, not long after, Lin Li could finally feel his lower body again. It was likely that his spine had merely been dislocated just now. After all, the sanctuary powerhouses had extremely strong bodies that were almost out of the realm of mortals, even if they were mages. Moreover, Lin Li felt that the falling moon arrow that the Immortal King's incarnation had used was less powerful than he remembered. It naturally was not because the Immortal King's incarnation had shown him some mercy. It was likely that Lin Li managed to gain some control over a portion of the Well of the Sun, and caused the incarnation's power to be weakened because he had restored gloomy dark and holy light. That was definitely good news for Lin Li. He was still worried about how he could resist the Immortal King's incarnation's attack if he lost the support of the debris of the stars by restoring it. It seemed that the restoration of each piece of the debris of the stars weakened the Immortal King's incarnation by a bit, and thus there would be a balance. Polar snow, raging flames. After Lin Li placed two more pieces of the debris of the stars back into the groove on the golden altar, he actually acquired more than half of the control of the Well of the Sun, and the Immortal King's incarnation, who was chasing after him, finally couldn't help but roar in exasperation. The Immortal King's incarnation even tried to remove the debris of the stars that Lin Li had placed in the golden altar. However, the golden altar, which now had the power of the debris of the stars, was covered by a powerful force that even the Immortal King's incarnation, who possessed level 28 strength, could not break. The Immortal King's incarnation flew into a rage and roared in exasperation. However, the attacks that landed on Lin Li did not explode with increased damage. In fact, Lin Li did not even have to turn around. With the detection of his mental strength alone, he could already clearly feel that the incarnation's strength was no longer as terrifying as it had been. If it had been at the very beginning, Lin Li probably would not have been eager to look for another solution. Now, the Immortal King's incarnation might have lost some power, but Lin Li did not have a good time either. The injuries of his body had not been treated in time, and he was afraid that he would not be able to exert even a tenth of his usual strength. Hence, Lin Li dispelled the idea of turning back to deal with the incarnation, and decided to finish what he had to. Once all 7 pieces of the debris of the stars were restored, he would gain full control of the Well of the Sun, and he would be able to deal with the incarnation however he pleased by then. Although the Immortal King's incarnation had been created by the Immortal King, it clearly had some sentience. After all, even the Lord of Darkness, that the Dragon of Destruction Azardus had created, was capable of having a consciousness. What more the creation of a mythical figure like the Immortal King? Lin Li's actions caused the Immortal King's incarnation to feel a great sense of danger as well. He even began to attack Lin Li hysterically. If the incarnation of the Immortal King had attacked Lin Li so hysterically right from the beginning, Lin Li might really have died there. However, unfortunately for the incarnation, Lin Li was now gradually gaining control over the Well of the Sun, and could even manipulate its power to help him resist attacks during his escape. Hence, it was much easier for him to flee. Thunderbolt, Rebirth. Another 2 pieces of the debris of the stars were returned to their positions, and the entire well of the sun seemed to be revitalized by the power of the 6 pieces of the debris of the stars. Although the well of the sun had still been trampled and ruined by the immortal king's incarnation, it did not seem like it had been destroyed at this moment. Lin Li, who had turned as pale as a sheet, was standing in front of the last golden altar, the corners of his lips stained with the blood that he had spat out just now. However, he was smiling at the immortal king's incarnation, who was chasing after him. Seeing that the immortal king's incarnation had activated the stars of fury and shot an arrow, which was the strongest of all arrows belonging to the king of hunters, Lin Li stabbed his debris of the stars, nothingness, into the golden altar without hesitation. With the restoration of the debris of the stars, the entire well of the sun began to shake violently, and the power that contained the laws of time and space emerged from the golden altar, spreading to the surroundings with the golden altar as its center. Under the nomological power, the entire well of the sun seemed to have experienced a reversed flow of time, as the palace that had been ruined by the immortal king's incarnation began to slowly recover its original air. At the same time, Lin Li had a sudden enlightenment, and the entire well of the sun was deeply etched in his mind. It was as if the well of the sun had become an extension of his body. The injuries he sustained also recovered quickly without any recovery potions. The incarnation of the immortal king was holding the stars of fury, but the terrifying power that was accumulating in the arrow was diminished because of the reversed flow of time. Next, the arrow turned into pure power and specks of stardust that dispersed in the surroundings. However, the mana-condensed stars of fury gradually turned into countless orbs that were hidden in space. Seeing this, the immortal king's incarnation shrieked miserably, his voice filled with horror and indignation. However, his shrieking did not have any effect, as his body gradually became thinner. The immortal king's incarnation charged towards Lin Li indignantly, and when his fist was about to touch the tip of Lin Li's nose, he turned into a ball of smoke that dissipated into space. Upon sight of the disappearance of the immortal king's incarnation, Lin Li finally let out a sigh of relief, and only then did he feel his legs turning weak. Fortunately, his injuries had long recovered, and his physical state was the same as when he just arrived. Even the space robe on his body, which had turned into a strip of cloth, was restored to its original state. With the disappearance of the immortal king's incarnation, the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars that constituted the domain world appeared from the void in the original spot of the incarnation before turning into 7 rays of light that shot out in all directions of the well of the sun. Lin Li could tell that the directions the pieces of the debris of the stars were going in were exactly where the golden altars were. That surprised Lin Li as he wondered, could the 2 sets of debris of the stars be merged together? Thinking of this, he arrived at the golden altar that was nearest to him, and removed the debris of the stars, nothingness, after a moment of hesitation. Seeing that the scene around him did not change as he removed nothingness, and the immortal king's incarnation did not appear again, Lin Li secretly felt a sense of relief, and focused his attention on the debris of the stars, nothingness, in his hand. Lin Li had a rather profound understanding of the debris of the stars, so as soon as his mental strength entered, he immediately felt the changes in the debris of the stars. But that was just one aspect. More importantly, the laws in the debris of the stars seemed to have become even more perfect. Although Lin Li had not detected any flaws in the debris of the stars when he first obtained it, it was because he hadn't known enough about the power of the debris of the stars yet. Although he had already had the debris of the stars, and the stars of fury in the endless world, he had still been only a hunter then. Besides, he had not had such an illusory perception in the game world. Hence, Lin Li only knew that the debris of the stars that he had been using was most likely flawed when he felt the change in the laws. In order to verify his guess, Lin Li quickly returned using the path that he took to come here. Along the way, he grabbed all of the pieces of the debris of the stars, and scrutinized them one by one using his mental strength. However, right after Lin Li got the debris of the stars, holy light, he suddenly felt a large amount of memories surging into his brain. After the fragments of memories appeared, Lin Li did not need to piece them together at all. Instead, they began fusing immediately and automatically, forming a relatively complete memory. When the memory fragments were put together, a large amount of information surfaced in Lin Li's mind hysterically. The information contained his comprehension and experience of using the debris of the stars, as well as his insights on the world and the creation of domains. As Lin Li stood still quietly, the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars left his hand and hovered around his body. The 7 origin powers emitted from the debris of the stars gradually formed an illusion of the domain world. If anyone were to see it at this time, they would notice that Lin Li's domain world was no longer as barren as before. Instead, it was full of life and vitality. In his domain world, greenery and living beings as well as sentient beings, with high intelligence began to appear, giving rise to brilliant civilization. The memory fragments that emerged in Lin Li's mind had come from his other 7 pieces of the debris of the stars, and they were memories that truly belonged to the immortal king. With those memories, Lin Li finally had a new understanding of the world laws, resulting in a drastic change in the world of his domain. Although Lin Li's current domain world still seemed somewhat worthless, compared to the one controlled by the immortal king's incarnation in the beginning, that also meant that Lin Li's magical domain had reached the peak of level 26. Besides, that was only the beginning, and the memories of the immortal king had brought Lin Li far more benefits than that. However, with Lin Li's current foundation, he could only assimilate them thus far. He would need more time to slowly comprehend and digest other profound information. At the same time, in addition to the increase in level, Lin Li's mastery and control over the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars had also increased qualitatively through his deciphering of the immortal king's memories. The immortal king could condense the stars of fury out of thin air with his mana. Hence, he definitely had a thorough understanding of the laws contained in the debris of the stars. Lin Li only realized that his understanding of the debris of the stars was just the tip of the iceberg after reading through the immortal king's memories. Through the immortal king's memories, Lin Li also finally understood why he had always felt incapable of fully exerting the true power of the debris of the stars in the past. It turned out that the absence of the stars of fury was not the only reason. It was also because he did not have the complete debris of the stars previously. With his comprehensive knowledge of the debris of the stars, the immortal king's incarnation managed to split their power in two, one of which was spread in the world of Anral, and the other in Well of the Sun. The immortal king's memories were far more valuable to Lin Li than gaining the ownership of the Sky Castle. After entering the sanctuary realm, every increase in level meant a step closer to the realm of the gods, and each step was even larger than the distance from the sky to the earth. After Lin Li digested a portion of the immortal king's memories, he actually managed to gain so much information and progress. Not only did his level increase to the peak of level 26, the combat power that he could now exert was definitely not comparable to what he had been able to do before, since he had gained a better mastery of the debris of the stars. As Lin Li continued to digest and absorb more of the immortal king's memories in the future, his path to the sanctuary realm's peak would definitely be smoother than before. Of course, the premise was that he had to get through the next obstacle. If he were to die in Osric's hands, he wouldn't have to think about anything else anymore. With this gain, Lin Li still wasn't certain that he would definitely defeat Osric, but he was at least more confident in dealing with the latter. Lin Li stood in place for a long time, until he felt that he could no longer comprehend anything from the immortal king's memories with his own power. He then slowly opened his eyes and raised his hand to put away the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars. Through this period of comprehension, Lin Li had gained a new understanding of the debris of the stars, and he could even feel the emotions conveyed by them. Even without the stars of fury, he could still exert power that was definitely hundreds of times greater than before. If Lin Li were to have another battle with the immortal king's incarnation now, he would no longer be in a pathetic state like before, though it was unlikely that he would win. If he used the same method, however, he would definitely be able to get rid of the incarnation without sustaining injuries. At this moment, the armies of the alternate world had already vanished because of the dissipation of the immortal king's incarnation. However, the expedition suffered major losses in the battle, and the effect of the reversed flow of time that happened when Lin Li gained control of the Well of the Sun did not work on the expedition. After all, it was a test that the immortal king had prepared for Lin Li, and the cannon fodder was not taken into consideration at all. Seeing that the armies had disappeared, those who survived finally let out a sigh of relief and fell to the ground ungracefully. They couldn't care if it was really safe or not. If there were any enemies, they would just accept it. They no longer wanted to put up a fight. Archbishop Martin's face turned pale when he looked at his team. After the intense battle just now, the Brilliant Shrines team had lost more than half of their members even though their strength had increased. That made the Archbishop feel extremely agonized. Those members were the elites of the Brilliant Shrine and their future. However, Archbishop Martin was more concerned about Lin Li's state. As long as Lin Li was alright, the magical weapon that Lin Li had would definitely make up for the losses this time, and it could even make the Brilliant Shrine become stronger. It seemed cruel to say that, but that was the truth. No matter how pitiful the casualties were, they were already dead, and those that were alive still had to consider their own lives. Compared to the Brilliant Shrine, the losses suffered by the Rotterdam Kingdom's team were far greater as almost all their alchemy colossuses were crippled. Seated together, Donald and Canberra looked around sulkily. If they could reach their goal of exploration this time, it would be worth it, but if not, they would definitely lose a lot. Even in the Rotterdam Kingdom, where alchemy was the mainstay, the value of the alchemy colossus was still huge. If they could not gain anything from the expedition this time, how could Donald and Canberra answer to the king and the officials of the kingdom. Even Prince Canber, who was favored by the king, would probably be directly deprived of his succession rights, or even reduced to a commoner. I wonder, what happened to that Philip? If we could get the magical weapons from him, it would be considered a form of explanation for the king, Canber said softly to Donald as he looked at the team from the Tower of Dusk. The team from the Tower of Dusk had already suffered some casualties in the intense battle. However, compared to the Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam Kingdom, their losses were negligible. The main casualties were the new mages, who joined the team. Due to the fact that they were stressed, there were mistakes in coordination, and they basically injured themselves. The result naturally made the other two feel extremely jealous. However, they were mages. Hence, they obviously wouldn't rush to the front line like warriors. Besides, the several legendary powerhouses of the Tower of Dusk had done a lot. No one could say anything, since they did not contribute nearly as much during the battle. There was a reason that Canber thought of Lin Li. After all, it was obvious from the situation just now that Lin Li's strength was clearly inferior to the Immortal King's incarnations. In Canber's opinion, the victory definitely did not come easy. Even though Lin Li won, he might just be at his last breath. Canber had always been very interested in Lin Li's magical weapons and coveted them, but due to the fact that Lin Li was a sanctuary powerhouse, he suppressed his desire. However, if Lin Li was already at his last breath, Canber definitely would not miss this rare opportunity to give Lin Li a hard time. Hearing Canber's words, Donald began to tremble in shock, and turned to look everywhere. When he saw that the people of the Tower of Dusk did not pay attention to them, he suppressed his voice, and said to Canber, "Your Highness, please don't mention that anymore. Even if Philip is injured, do you think we can deal with the people of the Tower of Dusk with our current power? What's the big deal? Don't we still have the Brilliant Shrine? Aren't they very interested in the other magical weapon that could emit holy light? We can cooperate with them. With the power of our two teams, we can definitely deal with those people from the Tower of Dusk," Canber said with interest, thinking to himself that his idea was definitely wonderful. However, at this moment, a figure suddenly flew in from afar, and had already landed in the middle of the expedition team in the blink of an eye. Due to the fact that it was flying too quickly, the members of the expedition even got a great shock, as they thought that the Immortal King's incarnation had flown back. Upon closer inspection, they realized that the one who returned was Lin Li, who they thought had escaped. How is this possible? Canber was preoccupied with the thoughts of having gotten a great advantage, but he did not expect Lin Li to be unscathed. Without a single wound on his body, he did not seem to have experienced a battle at all. When facing a full-fledged sanctuary powerhouse, Canber would know that the sanctuary powerhouse was definitely not someone they could mess with even if his brains were fried. Donald, who was initially already tempted by Canber, was just thinking about how to persuade the Brilliant Shrine's team to join forces with him. However, there was no need to think about that anymore. Even the teams of the Rotterdam Kingdom and the Brilliant Shrine would not stand a chance against a sanctuary powerhouse. "Master Philip, you're back. How did it go? Has that enemy left?" Seeing that Lin Li had returned, Archbishop Martin immediately went up to him and asked him that question happily. Archbishop Martin was also confused by Lin Li's appearance, as he did not seem to have gone through an intense battle at all. Hence, he asked if the enemy had left of his own accord. However, Lin Li did not deliberately correct Archbishop Martin. Instead, he nodded and said, "Let's organize the team and leave." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around to walk towards the Tower of Dusk's team, before beginning to check on their situation. Through the soul contact, Lin Li had long gained an understanding of the situation of the Tower of Dusk's mages. Hence, he went to the team to berate the mages who had made mistakes during the battle. Faced with Lin Li's rebuke, the mages who had been named began reviewing their mistakes in public. Seeing this situation, Archbishop Martin couldn't help but smile wryly. The mages of the Tower of Dusk had already done well enough, yet they still couldn't avoid being berated. What were his subordinates considered? Then, after painstakingly waiting for the discussion of the Tower of Dusk to end, Archbishop Martin walked over and embarrassedly raised a request. He hoped that Lin Li could use the power of the holy light to help the members of the Brilliant Shrine recover from their injuries. Lin Li could actually fulfill that request easily, and continue letting the team of the Brilliant Shrine be the cannon fodder. Hence, he readily agreed to it, and tossed out the debris of the stars. Holy light. The immense power of holy light immediately shrouded the people of the Brilliant Shrine. Seeing the injured members of the Brilliant Shrine, who were rapidly recovering because of the power of the holy light, Donald and Canber from the Rotterdam Kingdom were green with envy. Unfortunately, they were not believers of holy light, who could heal their wounded subordinates using such a method. Moreover, the biggest problem faced by the members of the Rotterdam Kingdom were not just casualties, but the damage done to the alchemy colossuses. It was not as simple as healing their injuries. Of course, Donald hadn't forgotten that there was another master of alchemy who owned a Titan-level alchemy colossus in the team of the Tower of Dusk. Hence, after Lin Li put away Holy Light, he immediately went forward to ask for help in repairing the damaged alchemy colossuses. At this moment, Angelana was still seated in the alchemy colossus, and arguing with Garl, the Lord Devourer. "You disgusting fellow. If you have what it takes, repeat what you said just now. See if I'll crush your brains." Under the control of Angelano, the alchemy colossus slammed its heavy fists together with loud sounds. Faced with Angelano's threat, Garl did not show any weakness. He disdainfully said, "Damn dwarf, don't provoke me. Be careful, or I might swallow you in one bite." "Is that so? Come and try swallowing me if you can. See if I'll rip your disgusting mouth apart." Angelano flailed his arms, and a pair of huge blades popped out of them. If Garl was still the Lord Devourer, he might really swallow Angelano's Titan-level alchemy colossus in one gulp. However, Garl was now using the transformed abyssal griffin as his host. Even if he widened his mouth to the maximum, he might not be able to swallow the alchemy colossus. Although the two of them were arguing, they did not really begin fighting, and were still mindful of the bottom line. While they were doing so, two giant hands appeared in the void, and pulled the two of them apart. Lin Li's figure appeared between the two of them. While taking out the summoning lamp, he said to Angelano, "Angelano, go take a look at their colossuses. If possible, help them repair them." Angelano was a little dissatisfied, but he soon saw Lin Li taking out the summoning lamp, and engulfing Garl's large body. He smugly said, "HMPH, I'll let him off this time." As he watched Angelano put the Titan-level alchemy colossus in his own alchemical space, Donald, who had been waiting at the side, was dumbfounded. When Angelano approached in his ridiculous and funny-looking armor, Donald came back to his senses. Taking Angelano to see the damaged alchemy colossuses, he probed, "Master Angelano, our Rotterdam kingdom has always been built on alchemical civilization. May I have the honor to invite you over so that we can exchange some pointers on alchemy?" Donald knew that Angelano was not Lin Li's servant, as the two of them had not signed a servant contract. Hence, he developed the intention of poaching Angelano. Since he no longer had the chance to get Lin Li's magical weapon, he would be able to offset the major losses that they suffered this time if he could successfully get Angelano to join the Rotterdam Kingdom's team. Exchange? What do you guys have to exchange? Do you think that having a few pieces of garbage that can move will represent alchemical civilization? What a joke. However, Angelano did not show Donald any respect at all. After thinking about it and realizing that he might often run into the disgusting Garl in the Tower of Dusk in the future, all the more he did not have the thoughts about leaving. If he were to leave like that, wouldn't that make Garl think that he was afraid of him? Donald was just about to say something, but he suddenly felt a chill down his spine. He quickly raised his head and looked over at the Tower of Dusk's team. Even though he did not see the young sanctuary powerhouse looking over at them, he still decided not to say what was on his mind. Although Angelano had helped with the repairs, the alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam Kingdom were mostly severely damaged. Hence, he only managed to repair a small number of them. Of course, most importantly, Angelano was too lazy to put too much thought into repairing the junk as it was truly tedious to him. However, no matter what, the Rotterdam Kingdom still managed to put together more than 10 alchemy colossuses, and they would more or less cover some of their combat power. However, compared to the Brilliant Shrine and the Tower of Dusk, their combat power still seemed somewhat pathetic, causing Donald and Canber to have great worries about the rest of the expedition. Although the Brilliant Shrine had also suffered heavy casualties in the battle, at least the ones who were alive were recovering well with the help of the Holy Light. Besides, the team from the Tower of Dusk hadn't suffered many casualties, and its strength could be considered unaffected. After some rest and recuperation, the expedition finally set off again, and headed to the place where they left the Well of the Sun under Lin Li's leadership. Back in the Endless World, Lin Li had already successfully explored the Well of the Sun, and obtained 7 pieces of the debris of the stars. Hence, he was extremely familiar with the Well of the Sun, and it was naturally not tough for him to leave this place. Lin Li led the expedition to a square located in the center of the Well of the Sun, and the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars flew out with dazzling rays of light towards the great whirlpool above the Well of the Sun. As they approached the great whirlpool, the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars spun faster, and the 7 origin forces fused together. They gradually opened up a passageway in the great whirlpool. There was no need for them to fly up into the sky. An unparalleled force darted out of the huge vortex, leading the expedition up into the sky and into the passage. When everything in front of them was calm again, they realized that they were in another enclosed space, which was not quite the same as the one they were in before they entered the world. The surface area of the space was extremely large, and it looked just like a huge square. Other than a few murals and sculptures, there were also a pathway and various gates. It was in fact the underground space of the Sky Castle that could be considered the core of the Sky Castle. The Sky Castle was like a city built on an inverted pyramid. Hence, there was an extremely vast space underneath it as well. It contained the power core that gave the Sky Castle the power to travel through space, as well as the control center that controlled the magic traps and gears of the Sky Castle. It also contained the mana source of the entire Sky Castle. Seeing the situation around them, Archbishop Martin, Donald, and the others suddenly beamed with joy because their goal of exploring the Sky Castle this time was in a certain corner of this underground space. When the three forces were cooperating at the beginning, they once argued over which target to look for first. As a result, Lin Li suppressed them all and demanded that they head to the central tower together first in order to make the people of the Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam Kingdom as cannon fodder. The experience of this journey left Archbishop Martin, Donald, and the others with barely any hope of finding their respective targets. The dangers in the Sky Castle were far beyond their imagination. The only hope they had was to leave this place alive. However, no one had expected that they would arrive here after leaving the Well of the Sun. For a moment, Archbishop Martin, Donald, and the others were so excited that they were about to cry tears of joy. However, after the excitement subsided, they suddenly remembered that they were in no place to make decisions about the expedition's advancement. Master Philic, according to the information we have received, the High Elven Queen's crown that we are looking for this time seems to be somewhere here. Do you think we can spare some time to go there and find the crown? Archbishop Martin asked anxiously. He was the first to reach Lin Li. Master Philic, the item that our ancestor of the Rotterdam Kingdom left behind in the Sky Castle seems to also be somewhere here. Can we go look for it first? Donald asked carefully. In the beginning, Lin Li insisted on coming to the central tower partly because he wanted to race against Osric, and also because he wanted to make the teams from the Brilliant Shrine and Rotterdam Kingdom as cannon fodder. Hence, he did not want them to leave early after finding their target. However, now that they had come this far, both forces had suffered major losses, and it was impossible for them to leave early on their own, so Lin Li naturally did not bother holding it against them. Hence, Lin Li nodded and said to Archbishop Martin and Donald, "All right, the two of you may discuss among yourselves whose target to look for first. Let me know when you come to a decision." Seeing that Lin Li didn't make things hard for them regarding this issue, Archbishop Martin and Donald were suddenly thrilled, and they quickly scurried to the side to discuss for a while. After reaching a consensus and striking a deal with each other, they decided to look for the target of the Brilliant Shrine first, the High Elven Queen's crown. The High Elven Queen's crown was rumored to have been made with the sun adamantine, and was embellished with 6 eternal gemstones that were made with the pulp of the fruit of the Tree of Eternity. Even an ordinary person would immediately be able to possess the incredible strength of the sanctuary realm after wearing it. Besides, there were also many guru-level mageths on the crown, the most famous of which was the Magic Rebound Mageth, which could completely repel magic spells that were below the sanctuary level. It also had extremely high defense against sanctuary realm magic spells. Besides, when one was wearing the High Elven Queen's crown, they would also have their mental strength increased directly by hundreds or thousands of times. At the same time, the wearer could also obtain an endless supply of mana through the eternal gemstone on the crown to dramatically increase the power of any magic spell that was cast. To put it simply, it was the crown of kings, and anyone who wore it would possess power that was strong enough to suppress everyone. Of course, that was not absolute. Otherwise, Garesco wouldn't have been able to kill the High Elven Queen in the first place. Most importantly, like the Moonlight Scepter, the High Elven Queen's crown would only have its full effects displayed if worn by those with the blood of the Royal High Elves. Although ordinary people could use it too, the effects would be greatly reduced, and at best it would be considered an excellent piece of magical equipment. Lin Li didn't know what the Brilliant Shrine wanted the crown for, but he was not too interested in it. Hence, he naturally wouldn't stop them from taking it. According to the information that Archbishop Martin had, the expedition soon found the room where the crown was likely to be. This time, there was finally a use for Archbishop Martin's key. He managed to open the magical 1000 contraption lock with great ease. In order to put Archbishop Martin and the others at ease, Lin Li did not enter together with them, and instead got Archbishop Martin and Prince Jeremiah to search the room by themselves. However, as soon as Lin Li watched the two of them enter, a loud roar could be heard coming from the door, after which Jeremiah was blown out and smashed heavily against the wall opposite the door. Jeremiah spat out a mouthful of blood, and before Lin Li could ask him any questions, he anxiously exclaimed, "Master Philic, Please give me a hand. That crown is too impressive. The crown is too impressive. Jeremiah's words made everyone in the room stunned. However, the roar of magic that continuously spread from the room showed how urgent the situation was. The fact that two peak legendary powerhouses couldn't handle it made Lin Li, who did not plan to interfere at first, feel somewhat interested. Besides, since Jeremiah had already taken the initiative to ask for help, Lin Li naturally did not consider whether it would cause any misunderstanding. He immediately walked towards the gate. After entering the room, the first thing Lin Li saw was Archbishop Martin resisting countless offensive spells. Besides, there was a crown floating in midair opposite Archbishop Martin, which was where the continuous attacks came from. However, the emptiness was only on the surface, and in reality, Lin Li could sense a strange spiritual fluctuation beneath the crown. Eidolon. The discovery immediately made Lin Li think of a possibility. The Eidolon was in truth just like a memory fragment, a solidified form of spiritual fluctuations. In Lin Li's opinion, the Eidolon beneath the crown was very likely to be a form of the High Elven Queen's inheritance seal. After the heir to the throne wore the crown, he would be able to obtain similar experiences and other inheritances left by the previous queen. However, the Eidolon would never have sentience, because it was just solidified spiritual fluctuations or some memories. Both Archbishop Martin and Jeremiah did not have any High Elven royal bloodline, and would naturally be attacked by the inheritance seal if they wanted to get the crown. However, it was not just an inheritance seal, as the crown itself contained powerful mana. Under the control of the inheritance seal, the combat power that it could exert was not something that a powerhouse that was at the peak of the legendary level could contend with, even though it was not at the sanctuary realm yet. Masterful. The crown suddenly and automatically attacked us for some reason. Do you have any means to subdue it? Seeing that Lin Li had entered the room, they quickly resisted the offensive spells while embarrassedly asking Lin Li for help. In fact, what was truly valuable about the crown was the Eidolon in it, or rather the inheritance seal. Even though there had only been 2 generations of High Elves because they had extremely long lifespans, High Elven Queens had always been true powerhouses of the High Elves, and were at the peak of the sanctuary realm. Their experience was priceless to anyone. Due to the restraint of the bloodline, no one would be able to exert the maximum power other than the royal High Elves. Since Archbishop Martin had taken the initiative to ask for it, Lin Li naturally could not turn him down. After thinking about it for a moment, he took out the Moonlight Scepter from the Ring of Endless Storm. Just like the crown, the Moonlight Scepter could not be used by those who were not royal High Elves. Even Lin Li was not an exception despite being a sanctuary powerhouse. However, Lin Li could still stimulate some of its functions by injecting mana into it. In fact, when Lin Li took out the Moonlight Scepter, the inheritance seal on the crown had already been affected. When Lin Li injected mana into the Moonlight Scepter and caused the gemstone on top of the Moonlight Scepter to shine, the inheritance seal on the crown immediately received a strong attraction. In almost an instant, the inheritance seal was sucked into the Moonlight Scepter, and the crown fell to the ground. Get the L test VLS at O.V.L.B. Co. Although Lin Li couldn't use the Moonlight Scepter, he could completely read the inheritance seal of the High Elven Queen through his mental strength, which had penetrated it. However, Lin Li still had fragments of the Immortal King's memories that he had not digested yet. For the time being, he could not use the memories from the High Elven Queen's inheritance seal. Watching the crown fall, Archbishop Martin did not know what Lin Li had done at all. After thanking Lin Li immediately, he walked forward to pick up the crown happily. Finally, the Brilliant Shrines team had somewhat achieved their goal this time, and had an explanation to give for the major loss of elites. At this moment, Donald and the others were standing in front of the main gate, watching Archbishop Martin put away the crown. They were all green with envy. At the same time, they eagerly wanted to achieve their goal as soon as possible as a way to make up for the huge losses on this expedition. Seeing that Lin Li and the others were all alright, Donald immediately went forward and respectfully said, "Masterful, can we search for our target now?" At this point, the Rotterdam Kingdom's team was actually inadequate to be cannon fodder now, but, after all, they had been supported by the Rotterdam Kingdom. Hence, as long as they were not courting death, and the item they were looking for was not of great importance to Lin Li would not bother making things difficult for them. Hence, after the expedition left the room, they followed the information provided by Donald, and headed to the other side of the underground space, in search of the so-called lost item of the Rotterdam Kingdom's ancestor. According to Donald, the item that they were looking for was in the control center of the Sky Castle. Although the existence of the control crystal of the Sky Castle would allow them to manipulate the Sky Castle at wish, there was also a control center, which was a manual manipulation option, that came with fewer features and permissions than the magical crystal. Due to the existence of the control center, the remaining High Elves at the end of the Dark Age had the ability to manipulate the Sky Castle and escape from Anral. Otherwise, the other people would not be able to use it, since even Osric, the proud disciple of the immortal king, did not manage to get the control crystal. The control center could be found easily for the members of the expedition team because they had the structural diagram of the Sky Castle. However, this place was different from where the High Elven Queen's crown was placed because it was guarded. Firstly, there were nearly 100 vengeful spirits, which all had legendary level strength. They were most likely left behind by the High Elves, who had controlled the Sky Castle at first. At the same time, in the rooms to the left and right of the control center, there were also quite a few alchemy colossuses and alchemy puppets that should have been responsible for guarding the power of the control center. All of them were also of the legendary level. Even when the Rotterdam Kingdom's team had just entered the Sky Castle, they probably would not have been able to get any benefits with such a force present. Besides, almost everyone in the team was now injured. The members of the Rotterdam Kingdom's team had initially thought that their search would go as smoothly as the Brilliant Shrines, but to their surprise, they were actually that unlucky. They actually suddenly encountered such a wave of enemies that caught them off guard, and added insult to injury since most of them were already injured and weakened. If it weren't for the timely rescue of the Brilliant Shrine, the team from the Rotterdam Kingdom, which had long been beaten up, would probably have fallen terribly before the finish line. However, even with the joint efforts of the teams of the Brilliant Shrine and Rotterdam Kingdom, it was still a very difficult task to fight against hundreds of legendary level enemies. Being able to ensure that they did not suffer any casualties was already good enough. As for the Tower of Dusk's team, they had already begun walking over slowly, and did not show any intentions to provide any aid. Of course, the Tower of Dusk's team could not be blamed for leaving them in the lurch. Jeremiah and the others were worried that Lin Li might want what they were looking for, so they initially did not want the people of the Tower of Dusk to tag along. Since Donald felt the same, there was no need for the people of the Tower of Dusk to go asking for trouble. In the beginning, Donald and the others were proud and had strong backbones as they did not want to seek help from the Tower of Dusk's team, mainly because they were worried that if the Tower of Dusk's team intervened, there would be changes after they obtained the item. However, Donald and the others did not persist for long before the door of the control center suddenly opened on its own. Next, the battle stopped, and be it the vengeful spirits, the alchemy colossuses, or the people of the Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam Kingdom, everyone lost their will to continue fighting under a powerful pressure. A monster with a blurry face slowly floated out of the door of the control center like smoke. The monster gave off an extremely cold and vicious vibe of resentment, which caused tension to build up, and the temperature of the entire space to seemingly plunge immediately. Even Archbishop Martin and the other peak legendary powerhouses couldn't help but feel their souls tremble as they felt that vicious resentment. The King of Curses, an existence of the sanctuary realm, that was born to curse the world to be destroyed. Upon its birth, it would be subject to the merciless slaughter of the world laws. However, the King of Curses was allowed to survive here because the Sky Castle existed outside Anral. Walking out of the control center, the King of Curses formed a cursed domain while endless resentment surrounded it. With the appearance of the King of Curses, two alchemy colossuses suddenly emitted the sounds of metal friction, followed by an instant collapse and disintegration without warning even though they had not been damaged. The metallurgists who were seated in the alchemy colossuses suddenly lost their vitality and turned pale before bleeding from all apertures. After the alchemy colossuses, a few warriors from the Rotterdam Kingdom's team also began bleeding and died miserably without even getting to scream. It was simply murder. Everyone in the team was stunned, but when they thought of escaping, they realized that they had lost control of their bodies. Even the few legendary powerhouses were immobilized at this juncture, let alone the ordinary people. Even Archbishop Martin and the others felt that they were falling into a trance. Once they did, they would be subjected to slaughter by the other party. Even the purifying power of holy light had lost its effects when faced with the King of Curses. That was a curse on everything in the world, including the heavens and the gods. With such a power, the King of Curses turned into a terrifying existence that even the gods avoided once it reached the peak of the sanctuary realm. Even though there wasn't an intense battle, they were all in a situation that was far more dangerous than any other battle that they had engaged in. Although the expedition had also encountered plenty of enemies whom they could not contend with in the previous battles, they could at least resist them. However, now that they were facing the impenetrable curse of the King of Curses, they were simply incapacitated and turned into sheep waiting to be slaughtered despite being bent on fighting. Master Falik, please help us on account of the effort that we've contributed throughout the journey. Donald had almost used all his might to yell those words. However, even Archbishop Martin did not hope that Lin Li would help them, because a sanctuary master's greatest reliance was their domain world, and the power of the King of Curses happened to be the destruction it could cause to the world laws. It was strong enough to be called the nemesis of mages in the sanctuary realm, with the power of the curse that could destroy the world laws. The King of Curses would still pose a great threat to the mages in the sanctuary realm even if it was at a lower level than them. With the power of the curse that could break the world laws, the King of Curses could still pose a great threat to the sanctuary masters, who were at higher levels than it, even though it was of a lower level. Lin Li was well aware of the terror of the King of Curses. If he had met the King of Curses previously, his only choice would have been to run away. However, Lin Li now wanted to find a chance to verify how much more combat power the gains that he had made in the Well of the Sun could give him. Hence, after hearing Donald's call for help, Lin Li did not just stand at the side and do nothing. The 7 pieces of the debris of the stars flew out one after another, immediately forming a large domain world that slammed down on the enemies. In the blink of an eye, the legendary level vengeful spirits and the large alchemy colossuses were left with no means to resist against the domain world. They were almost reduced to pieces under the pressure of the power of the world. The King of Curses also exerted its power of curses and caused a large amount of cold, chilly air to seep into Lin Li's domain world in an attempt to disintegrate it. However, after getting the Immortal King's memory fragments and restoring the power of the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars, Lin Li had already reached the peak of level 26. The domain world that he had created had evolved into a world of endless vitality, and had become incredibly solid with the support of the power of the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars. If Lin Li's current domain world were to collide with the Immortal King's incarnation's domain world again, it would definitely not collapse that easily even if it could not get the upper hand. Lin Li did not immediately kill the King of Curses, and instead carefully tried to sense the effects of the power of curses on his domain world. Exploiting the power of curses, he found some minor flaws of the debris of the stars, and corrected them before pointing his finger and causing the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars to suddenly speed up and revolve quickly, wiping out the King of Curses completely. As the King of Curses vanished, the people of the teams of the Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam Kingdom finally regained their mobility. However, Archbishop Martin and the others remained still, dumbfounded and unresponsive to everything around them. All they could think about was the scene of Lin Li killing the King of Curses just now. Although Archbishop Martin was only at the peak of the legendary level, he was extremely knowledgeable, and had developed great discernment after following Pope Rosario for so many years. Hence, after just taking one look, he immediately sensed that Lin Li's power had already changed drastically against when he first entered the central tower. He stepped into the sanctuary realm at such a young age and advanced to another level in the blink of an eye. Is he still human? What does that make us? Even the mild-mannered Archbishop Martin somehow felt angry and anguished at this moment. Did he live all his life in vain? On the other hand, Donald and Camber were elated to have survived, but they also finally knew that Lin Li had not got harmed during the final battle at the Well of the Sun. Instead, he made a huge breakthrough in strength, and that made them finally give up their plans. They just wanted to leave the Sky Castle as soon as possible and get away from the psychopath. However, Donald knew very well in his heart that before leaving this place, he still had to rely on Lin Li's protection. Hence, he moved closer to Lin Li with gratitude on his face, and said, "Master Flick, it's all thanks to your help this time. Otherwise all of us would have been buried here." "Alright, cut it out and go find what you're looking for. There's still work to be done," Lin Li urged nonchalantly with a wave of his hand. To him, the gratitude of cannon fodder was worthless, and the value of cannon fodder lay in the fact that they could be used at the most crucial and suitable juncture. Donald and the others were not bothered by Lin Li's urging, and instead were rather relieved because that showed that Lin Li did not seem to care much about the item that they were looking for. Soon, the members of the Rotterdam Kingdom's team entered the control center and found a metal box that contained a thick journal. It was rumored to be the notes that the Immortal King had taken when studying alchemy. Donald initially planned to tempt Angelano with the notes in a bid to get him, the Master of Alchemy, to join the Rotterdam Kingdom. However, Angelano merely took a few glances at the notes before tossing the journal back at them. When Donald was busy picking up the notes, Angelano disdainfully said, "This is just some low-level alchemy information, and yet you people treat it like a treasure." It turned out that although those alchemy notes indeed belonged to the Immortal King, they were notes that he had taken down when he first started studying alchemy. It was likely that one of the ancestors of the royal family of the Rotterdam Kingdom back then had secretly taken away that journal using his authority, which the Immortal King might have forgotten about. However, it was, after all, the Immortal King's belonging, and the ancestor didn't dare to take it away openly. Instead, he left it in the room of the control center, but when he finally left, he did not have the chance to take it away, thus leaving behind that information for his descendants. The real journal that recorded the highest alchemical achievements of the Immortal King was actually the one that the Ashen Warlock had given to Lin Li. It contained the information about the creation of the perfect body. If the ancestor of the Rotterdam Kingdom had stolen the journal back then, the entire Rotterdam Kingdom would have probably incurred the wrath of the Immortal King. Hence, given Angelano's guru-level attainments in creating alchemy colossus, he naturally was not impressed by such an elementary item. However, what was elementary in Angelano's eyes was actually considered profound to the people of the Rotterdam Kingdom. After just flipping through a few pages, Donald was already certain that the content of the journal was enough to allow the Rotterdam Kingdom, which had reached a bottleneck, to achieve a huge breakthrough in alchemy. Finally, Donald and Canber heaved sighs of relief, because the value of the alchemical notes was enough to make up for the losses that they had suffered during the expedition. Besides, the two of them were almost certain that they would obtain a boost in status after returning to the Rotterdam Kingdom. After achieving their expedition goals, the members of the teams from the Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam Kingdom all wanted to leave this hellhole. However, it was not up to them. Although they had already found what they wanted, getting out of here alive in the end still depended on the Tower of Dusk's opinion. Master Flick, I wonder what your goal of the expedition this time is. As long as you need our help, we will definitely do our best to assist you. After Donald put away the alchemy journal, he immediately ran to Lin Li to ostensibly show his loyalty, but in reality, those were just nice words, which he did not really mean. Of course, Donald didn't know that they had already acted as Lin Li's cannon fodder several times throughout the journey, and they even had to continue being his cannon fodder. Lin Li didn't explain to them what his goal was, but after the team was reorganized, he brought them straight to the underground central area, where there was a large teleportation portal that led to the top floor of the central tower. It was also the same floor where the control crystal was placed. Actually, the real control center of the Sky Castle was the topmost floor of the central tower, where the Sky Castle was controlled using the control crystal. The underground control crystal was just auxiliary. Under circumstances where there were no control crystals, it would allow one to obtain a basic control of the Sky Castle. Archbishop Martin and Donald and the others were already very familiar with the structure of the Sky Castle. Hence, when they saw that Lin Li was going to the real control center, they couldn't help but be a little surprised. At the same time, they made some unbelievable guesses too. Could it be that his real purpose for coming here was not to find any treasure, but to gain control of the entire Sky Castle? Archbishop Martin and the others were in disbelief at that thought. However, they thought about how Lin Li had no intention of exploring the other areas of the Sky Castle during the initial cooperation, and instead had his sights fixed on the central tower. That seemed to confirm Archbishop Martin's conjecture. Moreover, they also knew that Lin Li had already taken away the valuable things in the central tower when he had first explored the Sky Castle. If it wasn't for gaining control of the Sky Castle, why would he bother making another trip to the Sky Castle? At this moment, Donald and the others also finally reacted. They finally realized why the Tower of Dusk's team did not want anything when they were discussing the cooperation. It made them feel as if they were there to have fun. It turned out that it was because they were not impressed by those items at all. They wanted the entire Sky Castle. Frankly, Lin Li's ambition scared Donald and the others, who were well aware of the power of the Sky Castle, but never had the intention of taking it for themselves. It was not that they did not want it, but rather that they had the self-awareness that they could not swallow it at all with their small amount of power. Besides, even if they had what it took, it would be impossible for the Rotterdam Kingdom to encroach on the entire Sky Castle. Besides, that point was also proven along the way. Even if the Rotterdam Kingdom had sent their large armies, they would not have been able to survive the battle against the undead world and pass the barrier of the Well of the Sun. Donald knew very well that he and the others had made it that far because of Lin Li, the young president of the Tower of Dusk. It was way too terrifying for them. What kind of force was the Tower of Dusk? They had a young president with a bunch of legendary level monsters under him. Now, he even wanted to gain control of the Sky Castle. Donald no longer dared to imagine what a terrifying existence such a mysterious and powerful force would become if it were to acquire the Sky Castle. In the blink of an eye, the expedition had already left the underground space through the teleportation portal and reached the top floor of the central tower. The space on this floor was just as spacious as before, with no redundant decorations, except a pyramid-shaped crystal platform that wasn't very tall on the ground in the center of the space. Looking at the control panel in front of him, Lin Li couldn't help but feel some excitement, but at the same time, he also had some doubts about the absence of Osric, who was hiding in an unknown place. Now, Lin Li had to place the control crystal on the control platform before activating the control system of the entire Sky Castle. As long as he did that, the Sky Castle of the Immortal King would entirely belong to Lin Li. Even if Osric appeared, he would not be able to take the control away from Lin Li. Although they had gone through various obstacles along the way, Lin Li still felt that things seemed to be going too smoothly when he looked at the control panel in front of him. It was such smooth sailing that it was almost unbelievable. However, no matter what, since they had already made it that far, Lin Li had no reason to give up. He couldn't possibly wait for Osric to appear. If Osric had been held up by something, Lin Li would have wasted plenty of time by being wishy-washy. Of course, he still had to be careful when necessary, as he did not want all his efforts to go in vain. After getting the members of the expedition team to keep their guard up, Lin Li walked towards the control panel and took out the control crystal from the Ring of Endless Storm. However, when he reached the panel and reached out to place the control crystal in the groove, a figure suddenly appeared next to it at the speed of lightning. Before Lin Li could react, the figure had already attacked and snatched the control crystal from Lin Li. Just as the figure appeared and snatched the control crystal, a powerful, unparalleled magical wave erupted like a volcano, sweeping in all directions. Even Lin Li, the sanctuary powerhouse who was at the peak of level 26, was blasted away. Although they were far away from the control panel, the members of the expedition behind Lin Li were still swept away like leaves getting blown away by a strong gust of wind. They then fell to the ground groggily. Although the few remaining alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam kingdom were large in size, they were still rolling away like gourds and crushing people, producing new wounded. Lin Li painstakingly regained his balance in the air before looking at the control panel, only to see High Lord Osric, whom he had always been worried about. At this moment, Osric, who was holding the control crystal that he had just obtained, was staring at Lin Li, who was trying to regain his balance, with gloomy eyes. Strictly speaking, it was Lin Li's first time meeting Osric. When Lin Li explored the Sky Castle for the first time, he only met the awakened ghost. In Osric's mausoleum, the only thing that controlled the entire body was the wisp of Osric's soul imprint. As for the world created by the immortal king and Alana from more than 1,000 years ago, those were just counterfeits. However, due to various reasons, Lin Li and Osric had already been embroiled in various feuds that could never be solved. Perhaps they could be considered old rivals. Even though they were from two different eras, the Sky Castle had become their meeting point. The Osric in front of Lin Li was not in the form of a ghost, unlike what he always thought. Instead, it was a high elf that was well and alive with a real body and had the aura of life. He had bloodshot eyes, a pale face, and a tall and burly figure, which fitted the description of Osric in myths and legends. He was wearing the legendary Divine King battle robe, which was said to have been created for him. The black battle robe was as dark as the night sky. Beautiful patterns were embroidered on his collar, and his silver pauldrons were covered in dim golden mageths. The fine silver lines on the robe formed a mageth array with terrifying power. At this moment, Archbishop Martin and the rest finally recognized Osric, and while bewildered, they were filled with endless horror. After going through all the obstacles along the way, they felt that they had already seen everything the Sky Castle had to offer. However, when faced with the terrifying pressure radiated by Osric, they couldn't help but shiver uncontrollably. Actually, Archbishop Martin and the others were not the only ones. Even Lin Li, who had prepared for it, already felt extremely helpless when he was truly facing Osric. The horror that came from the bottom of his heart was something that he had never experienced before, even when he was facing the Immortal King's incarnation. "Oh, Osric, you've been waiting here," Lin Li said in a dry and hoarse voice. The 7 pieces of the debris of the stars had already begun flying around him a long time ago. However, fear was still pouring out of his heart uncontrollably. Osric's expression was a bit stiff. After looking at the control crystal in his hand, he shifted his gaze onto Lin Li again. He then coldly said, "I knew you would return. I have to admit, it was indeed my mistake for failing to keep you behind previously. However, this mistake won't happen again." "Is that so? I'm afraid I'll have to disappoint you. Even if you have a new body, you'll have to pay the price to keep me here." After saying those words, Lin Li's fear dissipated greatly, and he quickly regained his composure. However, Lin Li, who appeared to be calm, was actually constantly trying to cheer himself on. After all, he was a sanctuary powerhouse who was at the peak of level 26. He also had the help of the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars, so it wasn't impossible for him to fight Osric. Not impossible to fight. Despite cheering himself on, Lin Li still did not seem to have much confidence under the pressure of Osric. Besides, Osric wasn't angry when he heard Lin Li's words. Instead, he calmly said, "I have to admit that humans do have an advantage in learning that really makes one jealous. I didn't expect that after only a short period of time, you have already grown to the point where you are qualified to stand in front of me, but unfortunately, it was indeed a pity. If Lin Li had enough time to grow, he would definitely become a second Garesco, and even achieve greater success and attainments than him. Archbishop Martin and the rest had already begun to struggle while standing up. When they saw Osric speaking to Lin Li, they suddenly felt extremely small. The high elves have already vanished from Anral. Even if you get the Sky Castle, what's the point? Of course, Lin Li knew that he definitely wouldn't be able to affect Osric even if he got the Sky Castle. God knew what he was thinking. However, Lin Li knew that with his abilities alone, he definitely wouldn't be able to deal with Osric. Hence, if he wanted to buy time, he would have to make the people behind gradually get used to Osric's pressure. However, Osric clearly did not take Lin Li and those people in the expedition team seriously. He did not care if Lin Li was stalling for time, and he did not look at the expedition team at all. Once again, he looked at the control crystal in his hand, and somewhat resentfully said, "Back then, when teacher left the Sky Castle behind here, I always thought that it was meant for me. But it turns out he reserved it for himself. For the sake of his so-called immortality, he doesn't mind watching his race perish. To him, even his finger is more important than the survival of his race." Hearing Osric's words, Lin Li recalled the notes that were filled with questions and resentment, which he found in the Immortal King's laboratory. At this moment, he also finally understood that Osric had always wanted to find the Sky Castle's control crystal. Indeed, the rule of the High Elves was overthrown at the end of the Dark Age, but the biggest reason that caused the High Elves to fall was precisely because of the absence of the last Sky Castle. Although each of the 7 Sky Castles contained massive power, their most powerful form was the one where all 7 were combined to form a magic array that could suppress the world. Had the 7 Sky Castles really formed a magic array under the control of the High Elves, both sides would have been heavily wounded even if the combined resistance of the humans and other rebellion forces were led by Garesco City. In fact, if the High Elves had been ruthless enough, they would have been able to destroy the entire Anral with the magic arrays of the 7 Sky Castles. However, what really caught Lin Li's attention was Osric's claim that the Immortal King had kept the Sky Castle for himself. Lin Li was puzzled by his statement. Since the Immortal King already owned the Sky Castle, why would he save it for himself? Although the Immortal King seemed to have disappeared before the war broke out at the end of the Dark Age, and no one knew where he had gone, Lin Li could vaguely sense through various signs that the Immortal King had been observing the war throughout the Dark Age and had not really left Anral. The Well of the Sun was the very proof of that. The High Elves' Well of the Sun could sink into the Great Whirlpool only because Garesco had caused the Tree of Eternity to fall. Clearly, the Immortal King only kept the Well of the Sun in his world after that. Since the Immortal King had never left Anral and the Well of the Sun had always belonged to him, why did he have to leave it for himself? Yeah, my race has already perished, but yours still exists, and I believe you will soon be able to see the significance of me taking ownership of the Sky Castle. Osric's eyes flashed, and he put away the resentment in his emotions. He opened his palm at Lin Li, and countless magic spells gathered and surged towards Lin Li like a roaring flood. Lin Li, who had already summoned the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars, had been keeping his guard up against Osric. In the blink of an eye, the terrifying magic spells broke out, and the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars erupted with great power. A domain world that was filled with vitality immediately appeared. Almost at the same time, Osric began to launch a bombardment of infinite magic spells. The dense sounds of explosions filled the air, while Lin Li's domain world began vibrating vigorously under the violent magical explosion. Lin Li's domain world also began shaking like it was the end of the world. Osric said that although Lin Li was qualified to stand before him, it was only because he had stepped into the sanctuary realm, but in terms of strength and abilities, they were still worlds apart from each other. Lin Li was now a sanctuary powerhouse that was at the peak of level 26, and the power of his 7 pieces of the debris of the stars would allow him to gain the upper hand even in a battle against a level 27 sanctuary powerhouse. However, as the Immortal King's proud disciple, who had already become a sanctuary powerhouse at the end of the Dark Age, Osric managed to be reborn now through some means, yet his strength was not reduced. The domain world that Lin Li had built with the debris of the stars was torn by Osric's magic spells. In the blink of an eye, the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars broke free from the void. That was the difference in strength, and Osric did not have to use his own magical domain at all. He managed to crush Lin Li's powerful domain world with just some ordinary magic spells. In the instant that Lin Li's domain world shattered, Osric suddenly appeared in front of Lin Li, and he tried to punch Lin Li's head with his pale fist forcefully. Seeing that the fist was rapidly enlarging in front of him, Lin Li quickly activated his space robe, and he escaped from Osric's attacking range in a flash. Although he had escaped, Lin Li had broken out in a cold sweat. He was sure that if he had suffered a solid punch, his head would have been blown off. Just as Osric was about to continue chasing Lin Li, a giant sword beam sliced through the void, and immediately slashed against Osric's hand, which was holding the magical crystal. However, in the face of the sword beam, Osric waved his hand gently and nonchalantly. The sword beam that was enough to break a mountain peak shattered, and turned into countless orbs that dissipated into the void. "Conorus, are you that impatient?" Osric asked with disdain, sneering at Lin Li. The sword beam was emitted from Conorus' eternal frost blade. Lin Li was Osric's enemy. After snatching Osric's perfect body, Conorus similarly couldn't escape Osric's revenge. Hence, despite knowing that there was a huge difference between them, he was still forced to attack even though his soul was trembling uncontrollably because of Osric's remaining power. "Osric, you've sealed me for thousands of years. I can only feel at ease, and the resentment in my heart will only vanish if I behead you with my own hands." Knowing that they could never escape, Conorus stood out and pointed his eternal frost blade at Osric. "Lowly worm, how dare you clamor in front of me? Seems like you've become really brazen." With the raise of his finger, a ray of light darted out at Conorus like a magical crystal cannon shot. Conorus couldn't dodge at all. He only had time to prevent the attack from hitting his chest using the eternal frost blade. Next, the entire space even shook violently amidst the roars with a loud bang. Conorus' body immediately flew out amidst the explosions. Along the way, he scattered various orbs, but the eternal frost blade was turned into ashes by a single strike. Fortunately, Conorus' body was also a strong, perfect body, and had undergone some strengthening and repair by Lin Li. If it had been anyone else, such as legendary powerhouses like Canber and Jeremiah, they probably would have been blasted away. As Conorus was being blown away, Lin Li attacked Osric again, and the power of the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars was maximized. The 7 waves of power condensed to form the World Sword that cut at Osric's head like lightning. The World Sword that contained the 7 origin powers of the world could be considered the weapon that would allow Lin Li to exert the greatest attack other than the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars. The World Sword would leave long cracks in the space that it passed through. They could not heal for a long time, and everything in the world turned dim under the sword. However, in the face of the World Sword, Osric nonetheless raised his hand. He used his physical body, that was made of flesh, to hold the World Sword in place. Immediately afterwards, he saw Osric moving his hand suddenly, and causing the World Sword to collapse immediately. The power of the world immediately formed a magic storm, but Osric's battle robe did not move at all. However, after this period of time, the members of the expedition had gotten somewhat used to Osric's pressure, and at least they were no longer immobilized on the ground. Suppressing the fear within them, everyone began attacking Osric before Lin Li even instructed them to. The members of the expedition were well aware that if Osric really took control of the Sky Castle, the entire expedition, and even Lin Li, would not be able to leave alive. Besides, if Osric the Butcher took control of the Sky Castle, it would be a huge disaster for the entire Anral. All of a sudden, magic spells and light began swarming towards Osric like a storm. The few remaining alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam kingdom began swinging their giant steel swords, and rushed upwards with heavy footsteps. The mobile magical crystal cannons had also begun charging quickly, and the few mana cannons that each had the diameter of a bucket shot immediately. "You are overestimating yourselves," Osric humphed, and the Divine King battle robe that he was wearing shone with various rays of light from the Mageth, causing the entire space to be reversed. The offensive spells launched by the expedition also fell back onto them immediately. Immediately, the offensive spells of the expedition team were disintegrated by Osric effortlessly. However, the members of the expedition team were in a mess because of the attacks that they launched, especially the mobile magical crystal cannons of the Rotterdam kingdom, that were crushed into bits because of the mana backlash. Even the people around them were affected. Clearly, it was already impossible to snatch the magical crystal back from Osric. No matter how indignant Lin Li was, he had no choice but to admit that the difference in strength was huge. At this moment, Osric was probably far stronger and even more powerful than the 3 arbitrators of the Supreme Council. "Keep attacking." His attack reversing Mageth array has a time limit. As a guru of inscription, Lin Li immediately managed to identify the Mageth array on Osric's Divine King battle robe. At the same time, he was also well aware of all the information regarding it. Under Lin Li's orders, the members of the expedition immediately began retaliating against Osric after dodging the reversed attacks. While chanting the holy incantation, Archbishop Martin tossed the light of judgment that was burning with silver flames at Osric's head. Waving the staff in his hand, Donald chanted a long incantation at the top of his lungs, and balls of destructive thunderbolts were summoned from the void. The tender elemental Wyrm, Xiaohua, Ufalusi, Basel, and the mages of the Tower of Dusk were all powerful enough to destroy a city instantly, or even flatten a giant peak. A large number of offensive spells completely overwhelmed Osric's figure, and the roar of magic spells resounded through the air, causing the entire central tower to echo continuously with it. However, when everyone was going all out to attack Osric, Lin Li, who was giving commands to attack, did not join in. Instead, he once again triggered the power of the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars, and allowed them to condense into a vibrant pillar of light that was blasted at the pyramid-shaped control panel in the center. Lin Li didn't think that there was only one defensive mage array on Osric's Divine King battle robe. Besides, Osric's strength was at the peak of the sanctuary realm, and even without the robe, he would not be damaged by the expedition team's attacks at all. Hence, he made the expedition team continue attacking Osric only because he wanted to attract Osric's attention. The control crystal that was placed in the central control panel was Lin Li's real target. Since he couldn't get it, he had to destroy it. Faced with this situation, Lin Li had no choice but to be resolute. If he could not get the control crystal back, he would not be able to gain control of the Sky Castle. He wasn't willing to watch the Sky Castle land in Osric's hands. Under Lin Li's activation, the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars emitted a massive power that could destroy the world. Their power was merged together to form a force that could blast the earth into a bottomless abyss. However, in the face of the crazy attacks of the expedition, Osric held the control crystal and calmly raised a hand to put up a barrier. Watching Lin Li attack without doing anything, he did not seem worried at all, and after Lin Li's attack landed hard on the control panel, Osric finally sneered coldly and jibed. Teacher created this control panel personally with the core of the stars. It's impossible to cause any damage to it, even for me. As expected, when the brilliant light dissipated, Lin Li was surprised to find that the control panel was still intact despite having already sustained the full-blown attack that he had launched. Let alone being destroyed, there wasn't any damage at all. Seeing this, Lin Li and the members of the expedition couldn't help but feel hopeless and forced into despair. They could not defeat Osric, snatch away the control crystal, or destroy the control panel. Did they really have to let Osric gain control of the Sky Castle? In the history of Anril, Osric was known to be a ruthless butcher, who could no longer be simply described as having blood-stained hands. He had killed numerous lives throughout. The High Elves had been exterminated by the rebellious alliance of humans and others. As the High Lord of the High Elves, Osric, and other High Elves, was just as resentful towards the humans and other races. If Osric, who was considered the most brutal butcher in history, were to really gain control of the Sky Castle, God knew what kind of crazy revenge he would launch on Anril. That would definitely be a terrible disaster for all the races in Anril. Of course, that was all for the future, and no one was sure if it would happen. Not everyone was so noble to sacrifice their own lives for the sake of world peace. However, the expedition was certain that if Osric gained control of the Sky Castle, he definitely would not let them off, and none of them would be able to escape. Despite knowing that all their efforts would be futile under such circumstances, and having their hearts filled with despair, the people of the expedition nonetheless had no choice but to fight for their lives. Since they only had one life, which they might lose if they fought and would definitely lose if they did not, they decided that they might as well go all out. Since we can't destroy the control panel, let's destroy the control crystal. As that voice mounted, a pillar of mana sliced through the sky and accurately shot at the control crystal in Osric's hand. Angelano, who had already begun activating and maneuvering the Titan-level alchemy colossus, was the one who attacked. The mana cannon shot had come from the magical crystal cannons on the arms of the alchemy colossus. However, Osric did not dodge the mana cannon shot that was darting at him. Instead, he clutched the magical crystal with his hand and punched the mana cannon's attack. With a loud roar, the latter dissipated, but Osric's magical crystal did not get damaged at all. Yet another rebel who can't wait to be punished, Osric jibed coldly, swinging his hand at Angelano. Countless thunderbolts smashed into the large body of the Angelano immediately. However, Angelano had made a start, and the other members of the expedition team, who had been inspired by him, immediately focused all their attacks on the magical crystal in Osric's hand. Norfaler's body suddenly appeared beside Osric, and one of the 2 retribution daggers stabbed at his chest, while the other one stabbed at the magical crystal in his hand. Unfortunately, Osric was not a mere mage. He was both a mage and a warrior, but he had been classified by humans due to their limited talent. The High Elves had always been proficient in both magic and physical combat. Osric managed to dodge Norfaler's dagger, and he clutched the magical crystal, which blasted at Norfaler's chest at the same time. There were clear sounds of bones getting crushed, and Norfaler's body was blasted away. The 2 knights, Jeremiah and Canber, who were at the peak of the legendary realm, began emitting intense rays of light, while the sharp swords in their hands formed arcs of light in the air. They all exhibited their strongest combat techniques and besieged Osric. However, their only goal was the magical crystal in Osric's hand. However, According to the division of professions, Osric was not only a mage at the peak of the sanctuary realm, he was also a warrior. The melee combat techniques that Jeremiah and Canber were proud of were just as childish and ridiculous in front of Osric. In the blink of an eye, two figures flew out from around Osric, splashing large amounts of flesh blood along the way. Jeremiah and Canber were slammed into the ground, and they each spat out a mouthful of blood, no longer able to stand up. Frankly speaking, with the power of the expedition, it was actually impossible to hurt Osric, let alone destroy the magical crystal that Osric was holding. They could not snatch it, or destroy the magical crystal and the control panel. All of a sudden, the members of the expedition did not know how to fight even though they desperately wanted to. In this situation, the members of the teams of the Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam Kingdom could not qualify to even be cannon fodder. The only combatants who could fight were Archbishop Martin, Donald, Jeremiah, and Canber, the four legendary powerhouses who were at the peak of the legendary realm. The other few legendary powerhouses could not sustain a single attack at all, and they were too weak to fight. The few remaining alchemy colossuses were blown to pieces by Osric's offensive spells. After Jeremiah and Canber fell to the ground, the remaining people of the two forces couldn't help but become timid. On the Tower of Dusk's side, the tender elemental Wyrm Xiaohua, Ufalusi, Basel, and the mages were continuously attacking Osric with offensive spells, while the two humorous Wyrms were hovering and revolving above Osric's head. From time to time, they would spit out some dragon breath, or exhibit strong and powerful dragon language magic spells. Conoris, Norfaler, the demon Gordon, and the Lord of Nightmares fought at close range, with Osric without hesitation under the protection of their magic spells. Now, the Holy Death Knights could already be called the Retribution Knight Legion. They formed an infinite kill formation and trapped Osric in it, trying to brutally murder him. However, the difference in strength was so great that not long after the Retribution Knights and Osric clashed with each other, the Retribution Knights were almost crippled. Seeing that the Retribution Knights were no match for High Lord Osric, Lin Li had no choice but to get them to retreat for the time being. Next, Osric's figure flew into the sky in the blink of an eye, and threw the massive crimson humorous Wyrm away after pulling it down by its horn, causing it to smash against the wall in the distance. Osric fell from the air and stepped on the demon Gordon's head, flattening him into a metal disc. Next, he started fighting the Lord of Nightmares. Seeing that the members of the expedition were continuously getting severely injured, Lin Li was getting increasingly anxious even though he was constantly attacking. That was High Lord Osric. It was no wonder that he could kill the Tyrant Balak in the Endless Abyss with his own power. As an ancient demon deity, the Tyrant Balak and the infinite Zago demons were far more powerful than the expedition. It would be a far-fetched idea for them to use that power to subdue Osric, who was at the peak of the sanctuary realm. However, at this time, Lin Li suddenly felt his heart shake. It turned out that Osric, who was currently engaged in the battle, had already begun to expel Lin Li's mind imprint. Once he removed Lin Li's mind imprint from the control crystal, he could replace it with his own. He would then be able to fully control the Sky Castle. However, after detecting the situation, Lin Li was elated instead of being frightened. He was just being worried about how to start defeating Osric, but to his surprise, the latter gave him the opportunity himself. Lin Li had extraordinarily massive mental strength, and no one in Anral could compare to him. Even the three arbitrators of the Supreme Council were no match for him, in terms of mental strength alone. Hence, Lin Li was quite confident in his own mental strength. Although Osric, who was at the peak of the sanctuary realm, was difficult to deal with, he might not win in a battle of mental strength. At the thought of this, Lin Li summoned the Lord Devourer, Garl, from the summoning lamp, and instructed Garl to use his devouring ability to cooperate with others to continue attacking Osric. Meanwhile, he began injecting his mental strength into the control crystal, continuously in a bid to have a great battle of mental strength with Osric. Compared to physical battles, battles of mental strength were like great wars, and the massive mental strength that Lin Li controlled was like commanding a large army. After he injected his mental strength into the control crystal, he immediately fused it with his mental strength imprint. He then set up a formation to face the invading mental strength of Osric. At this moment, Osric was dealing with the attacks of those people of the Tower of Dusk, while injecting his mental strength into the control crystal to expel Lin Li's mental strength imprint from it. Hence, Osric was already aware of the sudden increase in Lin Li's mental strength imprint, but he wasn't affected by it in any way. The battle outside was already getting extremely intense, but the battle of mental strength was even more exciting and thrilling. Lin Li initially thought that he would be able to suppress his opponent easily with his massive mental strength. However, to his surprise, Osric was not that inferior in terms of mental strength. Besides, under the subtle manipulation of mental strength, Osric actually trumped Lin Li by a notch, as his mental strength was just like an elite army, constantly dividing and sieging Lin Li's mental strength. It continuously devoured the space occupied by Lin Li's mental strength. After a few rounds and a few exchanges of strikes, Lin Li knew that he had shot himself in the foot. After all, Osric was the High Lord of High Elves, and he actually began deploying strategies during the battle. Although Lin Li had transmigrated, the so-called tactics in his mind were just a 16-character guideline for guerrilla battles, which did not play a significant role in battles at all. As the High Lord of the High Elves, Osric had once led the Magic Legion around and waged wars countless times, and could definitely be considered a master of strategy and tactics. Although Lin Li refused to give up, and was continuously injecting his mental strength into the control crystal in a bid to win using his combat strength, Lin Li gradually lost the space his troops had because of High Lord Osric's continuous devouring. Eventually, he did not even have room to stand. In the end, Lin Li was defeated terribly in the battle of mental strength. Not only was the mental strength imprint completely eradicated from the control crystal, a large portion of his mental strength was depleted too. If not for the fact that Lin Li had a massive amount of mental strength, the battle would probably have been enough to turn him into a retard. After losing the battle of mental strength, Lin Li finally stopped taking any chances and launched a full swing attack on Osric after activating the power of the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars. Rays of light darted out from Lin Li's domain world without any magic. It was purely the power of origin. They continuously bombarded Osric. However, the situation on the battlefield was still out of control, and the scales were tilting towards Osric. After sustaining several severe attacks, Norfaller finally vomited blood, and was left with no power to stand up like Jeremiah and the rest. Connorus had already lost the Eternal Frost Blade. Although he could still continue fighting Osric for a while with his perfect body, he still ended up being defeated. Angelano's Alchemy Colossus was severely damaged during the battle, while Ufalusa's humorous Wyrms were almost smashed into bits. The Lord of Nightmares hovered in the air for a long time, but was still unable to reassemble his body. On the other time, the demon Gordon was smashed into pieces of iron, and it was eventually immobilized with no power to recover. Finally, Lin Li stopped and wiped the blood away from the corners of his lips, while the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars flew around his body and stopped attacking Osric. Meanwhile, there were no wounds on Osric, who seemed to have the same appearance as he did when he first appeared. With a cold smirk on his lips, he walked towards the control crystal as the members of the team watched in despair. He reached out and placed the control crystal in the groove of the control panel. It's over. Everything is over now. Archbishop Martin and the others wanted to stop Osric as they watched, but were too weak to do so. They could totally imagine the disaster that would strike Anril once Osric gained control of the Sky Castle. A sanctuary powerhouse who possessed the Sky Castle meant that even if all the sanctuary powerhouses of Anril joined forces, they might not be able to stop Osric from exacting a crazy revenge on them. Besides, Garesko, the god of mages, was no longer in Anril. No one would be able to make everyone unite. Of course, perhaps they might not live to see that, but after Osric succeeded in acquiring the Sky Castle, how would he spare them? Maybe it would be a good thing to die there so that they wouldn't have to see how miserable the various races in Anril would be when subjected to Osric's torture. However, something incredibly strange suddenly happened at this moment when they were all hopeless and waiting to die. The mana in their surroundings suddenly began to fluctuate abnormally, as if the floodgates had been opened. The massive mana was surging everywhere and roaring, and was causing the mana in the entire space to fluctuate as well. They could even hear the rumbling sound of floods. What exactly happened? The people only realized now that Osric, who had already won the battle, did not place the control crystal in the groove of the control panel immediately. Instead, he stayed in place, and seemed to have suddenly become a statue. They could all clearly see that Osric's body was still trembling, as if he was trying his best to put in the magical crystal. At the same time, Osric seemed to have aged quickly, as if time had sped up by numerous times. They got to watch the aging process of a young man turning into an old man. Seeing the change of Osric's body, even a brainless person would probably be able to think of the fact that it was a sign of his vitality being depleted. What could make a sanctuary powerhouse age so quickly? Thinking about the massive, abnormal fluctuations of mana in the surroundings that were surging like floodwaters, everyone suddenly had a terrifying conjecture. Did that mana come from Osric's body? The members of the expedition team could not figure out the reason for such a situation to occur, but they reckoned that it was probably the price to pay for gaining control of the Sky Castle. However, they knew that Osric was definitely at his weakest now. God knew if he would return to that state after gaining full control of the Sky Castle. Thinking of this, the crowd who had been in despair suddenly came to their senses again. Be it because of their interests, or their unconditional love and kindness, none of them wanted a butcher like Osric to rule the current Anril. Archbishop Martin, Donald, Basil, and the other casters seemed to have been invigorated. Suppressing the severe injuries of their bodies, they stood up with great difficulty, and raised their staffs to attack Osric again in spite of their severe wounds. However, the surrounding space was now filled with the violent mana that was released by Osric, and was surging around like a tsunami. In this environment, even a caster that was at the peak of the legendary realm would face difficulty condensing mana to cast a spell. Not to mention the fact that Archbishop Martin and the others were severely injured. Archbishop Martin had just chanted an incantation with great difficulty when the gemstone at the top of the scepter in his hand lit up. Before the mana even condensed, he spat out a mouthful of blood, and his physical state had clearly been debilitated. The others were the same. However, even so, Archbishop Martin and the others did not have the intention of giving up. Not bothering to wipe the blood away from the corners of their mouths, they began chanting the incantations again because none of them knew if there would be another chance like this, and no one knew when Osric would recover. However, at this moment, Lin Li stood in front of Archbishop Martin and the others. However, he, the only sanctuary powerhouse of the team, did not behave like Archbishop Martin and the others. Instead, he raised his hand and beckoned them to stop casting spells. Archbishop Martin and the others were baffled to see Lin Li's behavior. Although the surrounding space was filled with violent mana, they believed that it should not be enough to affect the spell casting of a sanctuary powerhouse. However, not only did the sanctuary powerhouse not take advantage to add insult to Osric's injury while he was down, he even stopped them from attacking. They wondered, is he still taking the moral high ground against a butcher like Demon? However, despite being filled with bewilderment, Archbishop Martin and the others did not question Lin Li. It was not because they trusted Lin Li unconditionally, but rather that they were too weak to speak after venting everything. Of course, Lin Li was not the type to refuse to take advantage of others when they were in danger. In fact, that was actually his favorite thing to do. The reason he didn't want to take the opportunity to attack Osric now was actually very simple. It was redundant to do so. Indeed, it was redundant because although no one else knew what was going on with Osric, Lin Li was well aware. He was the one who had set Osric up. From the very beginning, Lin Li knew that he would never be able to get the Sky Castle easily. Even though he was already in front of the control panel, he seemed to be just one step away from his final victory. Even though he did not expect that Osric would regain his body and strength here, that did not affect his plan for the worst-case scenario. Even when he was in the form of a ghost, Osric definitely possessed unfathomable strength. Even though Lin Li had managed to advance to level 26 in the Well of the Sun, he did not have any confidence in defeating Osric when he was in the form of a ghost. Hence, in other words, Lin Li knew from the very beginning that this battle was inevitable, and that his team would definitely lose. Since he already knew that they would lose, Lin Li obviously wouldn't pin his hopes on a miracle. In fact, when he was planning the expedition in the Sky Castle, he had already begun to devise some schemes and strategies for dealing with this situation. In order to scheme against Osric, one first had to know what his real purpose was. Why did he choose to be resurrected in the Sky Castle, and not in his mausoleum which he had spent so much effort to build after a thorough thought process? Coupled with the fact that he had caused the ghost Osric to be awakened when he took away the control crystal of the Sky Castle, Lin Li was almost certain that Osric's goal was the control crystal of the Sky Castle. Besides, Lin Li had a conjecture that Osric probably wanted to obtain the control crystal, not just to gain control of the Sky Castle, but also because of some other reasons. After all, with Osric's current power, it was not impossible for him to get the Sky Castle up and running again even without the control crystal. In particular, Lin Li was actually creating an opportunity for Osric to seize maximum control and authority over the Sky Castle when he took away the control crystal. In fact, even without the magical crystal, Osric had indeed gained control of a significant portion of the Sky Castle. In fact, Lin Li even vaguely felt that there seemed to be an invisible force influencing him and the others along the way. Although they had experienced several obstacles on the way, it seemed that all of those would never exceed the limits of the expedition's tolerance, except the incarnation in the Well of the Sun, or rather, there weren't any that exceeded Lin Li's capabilities. In fact, although every battle was extremely dangerous, it would still turn out to be successful for them. Lin Li did not think that the Immortal King's Sky Castle was something that a powerhouse like he who had just stepped into the Sanctuary Realm could invade easily. If that was really the case, the Immortal King's Sky Castle would be unworthy of its name, and the Immortal King could not be called the best figure in myths. Although Lin Li did not mention his impression to anyone throughout the journey, he was actually getting a clearer feeling that someone wanted him to arrive at his destination without attracting the attention and suspicion of the people from his team. That person was probably Osric. That discovery was the very reason that Lin Li was more and more certain that what Osric really valued most was not the Sky Castle, which was the strongest and most powerful weapon, but the special control crystal. Hence, even though Lin Li seemed to want to place the control crystal on the control panel, he was just doing that as a distraction. It was not actually the real control crystal of the Sky Castle, but one of the bizarre magical crystals that Lin Li had obtained from the Manhwa family. Lin Li wasn't 100% certain Osric would take the bait, but he was at least 70% to 80% confident in it, because according to the previous conjectures, Lin Li could entirely believe that what Osric had been waiting for was the moment he took out the control crystal from the Ring of Endless Storm. After all, with Osric's strength, it would not be difficult for him to deal with Lin Li and the others at all. However, even if he could kill Lin Li, he wouldn't have been able to take the control crystal out of the Ring of Endless Storm. If Osric wanted to obtain the control crystal, he would have to wait for Lin Li to take it out himself before snatching it from Lin Li. The only thing that Lin Li was worried about was the uncertainty if Osric was familiar with the control crystal, and whether he would recognize the difference between the real control crystal and the decoy. After all, Lin Li still hadn't figured out the true history of the control crystal, and he only knew that the purpose of the control crystal was not just to control the Sky Castle. Back when he had explored the Sky Castle for the first time, he had once had his mental strength infiltrated by the control crystal, and at the same time gained an enormous amount of information left by the Immortal King. Hence, even though Lin Li had used alchemy to transform the appearance of the bizarre magical crystal into that of the control crystal before arriving in the Sky Castle, and managed to pass it off as the real thing with identical mana waves, Lin Li could not replicate the power contained in the control crystal. Lin Li's worries did not vanish until Osric snatched the bait away from him. The fear within him also gradually dissipated when he began fighting with Osric in a battle of mental strength in the magical crystal. Even when Osric's mental strength had seeped into the magical crystal, he did not realize what was wrong. Clearly, Osric was really unfamiliar with the real control crystal. However, in order not to make Osric suspect anything, Lin Li did not relax or let his guard down. Instead, he pretended to go all out and fight Osric for the control crystal. He even didn't mind paying a huge price for it. Even at the last moment, where Osric was going to place the bait on the control panel, Lin Li was still trying his best to show his desperation, powerlessness, and indignation. When the bizarre magical crystal was completely triggered, Osric's mana grew violent, and Lin Li finally heaved a sigh of relief. Despite Osric's unparalleled strength, Lin Li was not too worried that Osric would quickly break free from the influence of the bizarre magical crystal. Although Lin Li was not clear about the origin of such magical crystals that could devour mana, and the Manhwa family had likewise chanced upon them during an extremely coincidental encounter, Lin Li already had a clear grasp and understanding of their bizarre attributes. In fact, Lin Li even frequently made use of their features to train his mastery of mana. One reason Lin Li was able to do that was that his mental strength had been tempered by the control crystal, and another reason was because of the research he had put in over the past few years. As for Osric, it was almost impossible for him to understand and master the features of the magical crystals in a short period of time, even though he was much stronger than Lin Li in terms of realm. Of course, his plan was not really foolproof, but the biggest issue with it was that Osric had to have no experience with such magical crystals in order for the plan to work. Even though Lin Li had already found out from the Ashen Warlock that such bizarre magical crystals did not appear since the Dark Age, he still designed another trap inside it just to be safe. Lin Li had already concealed a wisp of his mental strength in the magical crystal, which contained the power of Mephistos, the Lord of Souls. It would allow one's soul to be separated from his body. Previously, Lin Li had even fought a battle of mental strength with Osric in the magical crystal. Actually, the more important thing was to create a facade to cover the hidden mental strength to prevent Osric from scrutinizing the magical crystal with his mental strength. After receiving the Immortal King's notes from the Ashen Warlock, Lin Li knew that the perfect body created by Osric had some flaws, which were the very reason that Connorus could never fuse perfectly with the new body in any way. Likewise, Osric would also encounter such problems. Due to this conclusion, Lin Li added the extra trap when designing the decoy to be safe. When he had first met Osric, Lin Li had already seen that the fusion of Osric's soul with his new body was indeed not perfect, and there were still some flaws and issues in it. Although Osric had tailored the new body to perfection for himself, it was obvious that not all the flaws had been addressed and resolved. Hence, even a powerhouse like Osric would take a long time for his soul to adapt to the new body. Thus, when Osric placed the magical crystal on the control panel and triggered its bizarre power, Lin Li also immediately activated the trap he left behind. Although the small trap would only have a fleeting effect on Osric, the momentary isolation of his soul made Osric lose the best opportunity to get rid of the influence of the magical crystal. Mana was like water. The mana that surged out vigorously was like a river, while the calm mana was like a lake. Once the balance was disrupted, it would be difficult for them to calm down again, as it would be akin to a bursting dam. Hence, even powerful and competent mages dared not use their mana indiscriminately, because once the process of mana collapse began, the situation would never be reversed. That was the same for the High Lord now. He was continuously having his mana devoured, and soon faced the collapse of mana. Mana was continuously surging out of Osric's body like an unstoppable flash flood. Facing such a situation, Osric could not suppress it at all. Even though he was already at the peak of the sanctuary realm, he could not even roar in anger, and could only look at Lin Li with resentment in his eyes. The collapse of the mana left the perfect body with no means to sustain itself, and in the eyes of the people, Osric's appearance became old and aged at an extremely fast rate. His skin lost its luster, and he was covered in wrinkles and bruises. Osric's appearance reminded Lin Li of the first time he met the Ashen Warlock. However, the Ashen Warlock had aged over the years because he had been living for too long, while Osric was experiencing rapid aging because of the collapse of mana that caused a large amount of vitality to be depleted in his body. When they saw the changes in Osric's body, Archbishop Martin and the others finally understood why Lin Li had stopped them from attacking. However, at the same time, they were also incredibly astonished. Osric was a powerhouse at the peak of the sanctuary realm, so how did he end up in such a state? Lin Li's obstruction gave Archbishop Martin and the others reason to believe that the reason Osric had ended up in such a situation was very likely to be the young sanctuary powerhouse. Once the idea popped up in their minds, they got chills, and fear immediately replaced the joy within them. Such a scheme was simply too terrifying. It was even more horrifying than the powerful strength of a sanctuary powerhouse. Osric, who was one of the most famous geniuses of the Dark Age, possessed incredible wit and competency, both in strength and talent. However, a glorious and mighty figure who was a sanctuary powerhouse that seemed almost invincible actually ended up in such a miserable state because he had been plotted against. Archbishop Martin and the others couldn't help but feel fortunate that they were not the enemies of the Tower of Dusk. Otherwise, Lin Li would have long plotted against them and destroyed them completely. Of course, they wouldn't have known that they had already been treated as cannon fodder when Lin Li had plotted against them in the first place. Looking at the appearance of Osric, who was rapidly aging, almost everyone thought that the outcome was final and set in stone. However, at that moment, an illusory shadow suddenly rushed out from Osric's body, followed by an infinite amount of mana that shrouded the entire expedition. Archbishop Martin and the others were astonished to see that, but it was already too late for them to respond to the sudden change. Fortunately, Lin Li seemed to have come prepared. His 7 pieces of the debris of the stars entered the void, and the domain world immediately engulfed the expedition, forming a layer of defense against the overwhelming attack spells. That's Osric's soul. When the offensive spells collided violently with the domain world, Archbishop Martin and the others finally reacted, and discovered to their absolute horror that the shadow flying out of Osric's body was Osric's soul. This scared Archbishop Martin and the others as they finally remembered that Osric was a sanctuary powerhouse, whom no ordinary people could contend with. Sanctuary powerhouses were already existences that were nearly godly. Even if his body was decayed, his soul would still be almost indestructible, and the strength it possessed would not be weakened by the loss of his physical body. The battle just now had proved how terrifying a powerhouse that was at the peak of the sanctuary realm was. The members of the expedition team were practically useless in front of Osric. Even Lin Li, who was also in the sanctuary realm, had no means to retaliate. Now that Osric's soul had emerged with just as much power, it was obvious what their outcome would be. However, Lin Li was not the least bit surprised that Osric's soul had appeared. In fact, he even expected it, simply because Osric's soul was not perfectly fused with his new perfect body. When Osric's soul and the perfect body did not fuse seamlessly, it would be akin to the relationship between a metallurgist and the alchemy colossus he controlled. If anything went wrong with the alchemy colossus, he would be able to escape in time. On the other hand, if they fused perfectly, it would definitely be difficult to separate them. Of course, the lack of a perfect fusion between Osric's soul and his body was one of the main reasons why Lin Li could get his trap to work. If Osric had achieved perfect fusion, Lin Li would not have been able to plot against him successfully with that magical crystal. Given Osric's realm and abilities, he might be really broken free from the influence of the bizarre magical crystal. Hence, nothing in the world was perfect, and one could never get the best of both worlds. Win some, lose some. Lin Li had long been prepared for the situation that they were facing now. At least Osric's strength would definitely be affected greatly after losing his body. Damn it, you all deserve to die. Osric had never been so enraged before. Even when he parted ways with the immortal king, and knew that the high elves had already fallen, he was never this infuriated. Just like the immortal king, glorious and dignified High Lord Osric was a mythical figure. Yet, he actually lost his new body, after being plotted against by a junior. It was a huge insult and humiliation to him. In particular, this proved that all his previous plans had been seen through by Lin Li, and he had been plotted against several times before.
Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.